Disclaimer. This information shared in the podcast is for informational educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional counseling, therapy, diagnosis, or mental health treatment, and should not be relied upon as such. Always seek guidance of a qualified mental health professional with any concerns or questions you may have about your well-being. The views of this opinion expressed are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the podcast. Neither the host nor the guest assumes any liability for the actions taken based on the content of this episode.
Welcome to ID Fitness Podcast, where we dive into real conversations about health, faith, and growth. Today, we're joined by Pat Ward, a counselor and a former pastor who's passionate about helping people turn counseling into real life change. In this episode, Pat shares his journey from ministry to mental health, why therapy is less about what happens in the room and more about what you carry into your daily life, and how to build healthier relationships without constant fighting. We talk about practical tools for handling anxiety, depression, and OCD, what biblical counseling really looks like, and how to balance out truth and grace in tough conversations. Pat also shares how shame keeps people stuck and why seeking help is actually a good sign of strength. This conversation is packed with wisdom, encouragement, and to use tools you can use right away. Let's jump in with Pat Ward. Well, Pat, welcome to ID Fitness Podcast.
Man, I'm excited to be here. I haven't been in this seat in a long time, so
yeah, it'll be interesting talking to you because the people I've talked to and they ask all these questions, they want to get to know you better. They're so used to you listening to them so well,
yeah,
and so the tides have turned.
Yes, well, I'm excited about that. It's easy to forget in counseling there is a power dynamic. There's always a responsibility of trying to steward that well. But yeah, I think I try to reflect so much onto other people. I do think it leaves people a little bit curious. But I'm not like a wizard. I wasn't just born into that chair that I have in my office. Like I do bring a lot of my life into that too. So
yeah,
sure, I'm excited to talk about.
Would you say that your counseling is you try to be as relational as you possibly can? Or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I do. I think the thing that's different about my counseling, that the longer that I'm in it, is I really try to meet people in their motivation, especially their motivation to feel better or to do things. And so we kind of move fast. So I'm not really like a let's sit and let the silence talk to us kind of counselor. I'm more like a, hey, let's try to figure out, what's the next step? What's in the way? What's the thing that you haven't really said out loud that would be helpful to say and see that, the room didn't fall down and nobody ran out screaming, their ears bleeding, like we can handle these things. And then once we get on the other side of that, like how do we begin to make changes that way? And I just, I don't know. I feel like I try to figure out how what we talk about in counseling becomes portable for people so they take it out and apply it to their life. The thing that I tell people a lot is like, and I learned this from my old friend Phil Bequee, but therapy is not what happens in the counseling room. That's kind of where we make plans, we evaluate things, we figure some things out. We may just try to search some new areas of ourselves that we haven't before, but therapy is actually what happens outside the room. I mean, it's when you put up a boundary, or when you go one day without drinking or smoking weed or something that you're trying to get over, or it happens when there's a hard conversation that you've been putting off and you decide to have it. And so that's where that's where we actually grow and get stronger and things like that. So we try to just set people up well for that. That's the big win.
Yeah. When me and you briefly talked on the phone, one of the things was said, you want to give something that's tangible to them, so that way they can put out in practice. Kind of give some tips on like what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, especially because so much of life is in relationship. I do a lot of work with couples. And so, something tangible kind of becomes that. It's kind of a thing for people instead of the tug of war that couples are usually having about trying to figure out who's right or who's wrong or whose way is going to be better than the other, is that they can sit side by side and look at this principle or look at this maybe even a new rule that they're going to try to establish, or a new boundary, or a new rhythm that they want. And they can be like, well, what would this be like? How could this work for us? And how might this change things? And so just something practical like that really helps. And then, even for people I work with individually, whether it's anxiety or depression or ADHD or OCD, I mean, it's one thing to be in a safe space like a counseling office and be able to sort things out and kind of dive into those thought patterns that sometimes keep us down. But it's another thing to get out into the real world and have something. I mean, it in a lot of ways, it's kind of like figuring out how to load somebody's toolbox with things. So, been working with a couple of people on OCD. And so when they're in one of those situations when it's really a challenge, like, driving for some people is a challenge. They wonder, did I run over somebody? Did I just hit something with my car? Did I do something wrong and I just didn't notice? And, to give them the tool of like, no, just sit in that discomfort, take a deep breath, look around, you didn't feel anything, you didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything. And then instead of continuing to push for that certainty that OCD is kind of built on, instead we're going to go by our best guess, and we're going to try to operate under that and kind of move forward there. So just try to figure out how to give tools for people to use to keep them sharp and to use them for whatever situations they may face.
I like that analogy too, because you're just loading their toolbox and they're going to be the ones grabbing the tools to apply them.
That's
and
right.
See. That's really cool.
That's right. I'm not going to be there. I can't hand you the tool. You gotta be willing to open it up and have the confidence to know that you have something in there that'll work for whatever situation you're facing.
I want to now. We've had audience ask a whole bunch of questions.
Sure.
And so I want to give them as much resources as possible and just valuable information to take from this. So
sure,
we're just going to kind of dive into those.
Sure.
I love this question and they wanted to stay anonymous. So do I need to have verbal arguments, yelling and screaming for a healthy marriage? Some people say if I never fight, the relationship isn't healthy. What do you think about this?
That's a good question. Some people say, lots of good things start with the phrase, some people say. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, I think I have been really blessed with a peaceful marriage, and that's not because I'm a marriage counselor, because I was not one when we got married. And we've just been very blessed. I think I can count on one hand the arguments that we've had. I don't know that we've ever yelled at each other, but I do think we figured out other ways to make sure that important conversations are had, or to make sure that the other person feels heard. And sometimes it's when people don't feel like that's happening that they resort to getting loud and kind of feeling like they have to come up over the other person. One of the things that I have noticed after working with so many couples is most couples have the same argument over and over and over again. It may start in a different place, and the first 90 seconds may be different. On one day it's about money, or the next day it may be about a stressful week or about sex or something like that. But it usually gravitates back towards saying the same things that they know is going to, sting a little bit. It may resort back to depending on the same narratives, or blowing things up and making this huge argument about things. And so gravity just kind of pulls people back to those same old things. But if we can figure out what keeps falling in the gap in communication, then we really don't have to keep getting loud in order to do that. So I don't necessarily agree with some people who may say, if you don't fight, then you don't have a healthy marriage. I do think, there's definitely another end of that spectrum. If you don't ever talk about anything, or if you don't ever feel like you can let something raw out in the middle of your marriage, well, then you probably don't have intimacy. I mean, that's probably something that you're missing. And so hopefully when people can have some safe space to be able to do that, then they don't have to resort to screaming and yelling and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's almost like they went to the other extreme. Like,
yeah.
No peace. You got to fight.
Yeah. There is this interesting thing that happens in relationships, because there are some kinds of people, when there's disagreement or tension, their anxiety, and I'm not talking like clinical anxiety, I'm talking about just the kind that seeps into everyday life. But one type of person, their anxiety says, we got to fix this right now. We need to deal with this. It needs to be over and done with. Another person, when there's disagreement or tension, their anxiety says, I need to slow things down so I know that what I say matters. I need to know how I feel, and then I need to express that well. And so those competing anxieties really do impact people, because the universe likes to put those two different types of people together. And so if you got one person that's like, man, we need to talk about this right now, and the other person who's trying to back away from that, well, then the first person is going to get a little bit angrier, and the other person is going to back away even more. And then before long, we have frustration and arguments and stuff like that. And it takes a while to kind of sort it out. But in general, if we can just be the best version of those two people we can avoid a lot of arguments and stuff like that.
It's interesting because I feel like I grew up in a house like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom wanted to fix it ASAP. And my dad was like, I need time to think.
Yeah.
And it was like a tornado.
Yeah. And a lot of times,
each other.
it takes a while before people can figure that out. It's like, in marriage, you can really spend all of your time being frustrated about your partner when they're just different from you, you know, and if we can come to acknowledge that and accept that and stop always trying to change it, that it may not be right or wrong, it may just be different, then we can figure out how to communicate around that. But a lot of times it's just, you know, this frustrating assumption that our partner's doing something to us on purpose, when in reality it's just a competing anxiety, or it's just a different way that they see things.
Yeah, and to let them know that they're on the same team.
Yeah.
Like there might, I mean, it could, but most time, at least from my experience, with the couples that I feel like fight well, their intent is to do well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that intent to do well actually harms the other person.
That's right.
Because like you said, they're competing.
Yeah. Or you have narratives. I mean, that's a big thing that I talk about in couples counseling a lot is, you know, we always tell stories. Our mind is kind of built around telling stories because it's the way that it conserves energy. For example, there's a plant in my office that I have kept alive now for 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's the longest I've ever kept a plant alive, but we're at this point where if I water that plant on Thursday or Friday, then my brain kind of shuts it out until the next Thursday or Friday. I'm not on the weekend thinking, is it getting enough sunlight right now? Is it warm enough or cold enough? Like what's going on with that plant? My brain just kind of checks it off the list. And in relationships, a lot of times people, they bring about narratives about their spouse, about themselves, about their relationship. And before long, we start interacting with those narratives, this version of our spouse, rather than the living, breathing, dynamic, growing, hurting, healing mystery that's right in front of us. And so that's where a lot of conflict starts, is that we don't get around to evaluate. Well, she's just like her mother. You know, we don't ever get around to evaluating that because we've been collecting evidence that backs up that narrative and ignoring evidence to the contrary, or he's only interested in one thing, or, you know, we just don't know how to communicate. If we don't go back and reevaluate those narratives, well, then again, we're going to keep coming back to the same places of frustration and the same points of conflict over and over again.
Yeah, it's interesting when people comment, and I just overhear this too, and they're like, they're just acting just like their mom or just like their dad. I'm like, you don't think they would have? Like, they
Right.
come from that family. Like,
Right.
I appreciate you noticing was going to happen anyway.
That's right. That's right.
Next question. Why do most counselors run from couples or family therapy?
I don't know. I did realize that when I was going through my supervision years, that a lot of counselors that I really looked up to and enjoyed learning from, they were like, I'm not doing couples work. I'm not doing family work. And there are some days when I get that. I mean, because couples work and family work, it's kind of like riding a tornado. You just jump in and you swirl around and you're just trying to find something that's like nailed down to the ground, like an opening somewhere. So it can get kind of wild at times, but I think that's kind of why I like it. I think if I'm working with a couple and, you know, within the first 2 or 3 hours, there's not a point when we're all three yelling at each other, like we aren't really doing anything. So, you know, I'm good with riding the tornado. I do think that a lot of couples counseling is really hard, fundamentally because people who seek out couples counseling probably should have done it a year earlier. And a lot of those wounds and a lot of those patterns are deeply ingrained by the time they actually reach out for help. And so I do think that's one of the frustrations of doing that kind of work. And so, you know, I think there's some good, maybe wisdom in that. I have a lot of couples who come for maintenance, you know, just like, hey, we just need a place where we can talk, and we have, you know, just some space with a mediator there to talk about things when they're at level 1 or 2 instead of when they're at level 10. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. And, you know, either that or in other couples who surround themselves with other healthy couples and other healthy people in their life, just so that they just have, even if it's not in therapy, they just have a natural place where they're going to be able to talk about things at a lower level, so things can be reflected, and we can tell if there's a problem or if we've let some resentment grow in our hearts long before it gets to be like a level 10 emergency.
It's interesting you say that too, because for some reason, as you were talking, this popped in my head. One of my friends, he goes to church in California, and their small group leader, it's like a community group, the wife and the husband are both counselors. And so it's all couples.
Yeah.
And they get a babysitter and watches all the kids.
Yeah.
And they basically have a counseling session, like, you know, once a month for the community group.
Yeah.
And the counselors, they also get vulnerable. Like, this is what we're trying to work on. This is how we got in a fight. And this is how we're trying to work through it. And I'm actually still kind of frustrated with him.
Yeah, I can see the value in that.
And so it was like really, they said it was really revealing because it's like, oh, we're not the only ones struggling here.
Right. And there's so much power in that. And that I'm actually, and I know this is something that you're interested in too. I'm actually trying to figure out, how do we set more small groups up for conversations like that, even ones that aren't led by two counselors? Like, how do we continue to break in with either healthy relationship, just principles for health, but also for mental health? How do we democratize that and kind of push it through? And especially, how does the church understand that and begin to integrate it into small groups or into their discipleship models? And so, I mean, I think there's a lot to be gained from that.
Yeah, that's what I'm currently working on, like a forecast or like overview of what discipleship looks like at like all the deep levels of relationship.
Yeah.
And so that way hopefully we'll get it done soon. And then I'm going to send it to people, see what they think, how did it come across, and then also send it to the church of like, hey, how do we impact this as the vision of the church?
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So that had me thinking about discipleship when you said that.
Wonderful.
Ooh, this will be good. As Christians, how should we handle a family member who's a narcissistic or has narcissistic traits? Because that word's thrown out a lot.
Oh my gosh, it is. It is. We live in a TikTok era, and so in TikTok land, most of us have diagnosed everybody that we are having a hard time with as being narcissistic, and so it's those are real issues. There are a lot of people who are trying to fight through those things and bravely trying to work on themselves through those things. But I do think that especially for narcissism, we really see that word being expanded to a lot of things so that it doesn't really mean what it should mean. I mean, there is a narcissistic personality disorder. There are people who suffer with that. There are rings of people around those people who are definitely suffering because they're in relationship with people who are narcissistic personality disorder. Usually you can tell somebody who has that disorder because their life is a dumpster fire. I mean, there's a lot of issues with employment. There's a lot of issues with finances. There's a lot of issues in their family of origin. There's just a mess kind of everywhere. There are also people that we deal with in life that definitely are hard to get along with, definitely see the world in very rigid ways, and definitely are difficult to communicate with. It's not that they're narcissists. We still have to figure out how to interact with unhealthy people in our life. But I do think one of the first steps is trying to figure out, beyond just labels, which again, I hear that label a lot, but beyond just labels, how do we begin to understand the impact that other people have on us and understand what's going on? Because sometimes it's because they have competing agendas from us. Sometimes it's because they have some anxiety that's beneath the surface. Again, like we're talking about in relationships, a lot of the shape of our relationships are about competing anxieties. Sometimes it's because they've been through trauma. Sometimes it's because they have ADHD or some other executive function struggle that may make them irritable or not easy to have empathy. And so there's a whole lot of different ways why it may be hard to get along with a certain person. If we can get beneath the label, sometimes it's easier to kind of progress. Beyond just like helping to deal with that, sometimes it's just a matter of trying to figure out how close, what orbit we need to put people in our lives. And so I like to think about relationships, not necessarily like a light switch, like I'm in a relationship with somebody, I'm out of relationship. Of course, obviously marriage is different, but I think it's important to think about it as in terms of orbit. So the Earth orbits the sun in what they call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. If we were any closer to the sun, we'd all burn up. We couldn't live. If we were any further away from the sun, we'd all freeze to death. We couldn't live. And so Earth is kind of settled in the right orbit around the sun. And I think a lot of life, especially as we grow and we age, a lot of life has taken the people that we're in relationship with and moving them in different ways through time and energy and our intentions, moving them into different orbits around us. So some people, we have people that are in our close circle. Maybe it's because we were friends in college. Maybe it's because they're a family member. Maybe it's because they're a neighbor. We just have them close, but it's not really good for them to be in our inner circle. And so we don't have to cast them out into deep space, but we may need to push them out into a couple of further bands and, really kind of limit our time and more than anything, limit the amount of influence we put over them in our lives. But then, when we're trying to grow new healthy relationships, we don't have to just hope that we meet somebody and make a new friend, or if we're single, that we meet somebody and we have a romantic relationship. It may be good to evaluate who are the healthy people that I just haven't prioritized time for, or I just haven't, done the hard work of finding shared experiences with. How can I move them into the inner circle and find that Goldilocks zone with them? And so sometimes I think dealing with people with narcissistic traits or people who are hard to get along with, it's not necessarily about changing them, it's changing our relationship with them.
I like that too. And as you were speaking, it reminded me of like Christ and his circle. He had an inner circle, he had an outer circle, and he loved them and he cared for them. But again, they all were on different types of missions, different personalities. I think that kind of goes well.
Yeah, it was just honest about, hey, do we have the same kind of vision for what's going on here? And the same, are we operating on the same set of assumptions?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good analogy.
How would you describe biblical counseling to someone who's never experienced it?
Yeah. Let me think. So when I went back to school in 2016 to become a counselor, I went back and got my LPC, which is not a biblical counseling license, but I was working with a mentor during that time. We would fast and pray together during that season about the transition I was making, and just felt like that was going to be that choice and pursuing that type of licensure was going to give God more options with my life. And that was something that I didn't really think about it that way before, but I really appreciated his insight on that. And so I'm very thankful to be able to work with all kinds of people. I work with a lot of Christians. I work with people of no faith. I work with people of other faiths and stuff like that. And that was something that I really hoped, that God had for me in this chapter, was an influence even beyond the church. But I do live in the South, and there are a lot of Christians in the South. And so a lot of times it's not long before we're talking about how we integrate faith in people's relationships. So I think it's really important for everybody to understand that we have theology, big T theology, and we have micro theologies. And those micro theologies are the way that, what we believe about God impacts our Tuesday or our Thursday. And sometimes those two things are related. What we believe about the incarnation and about a virgin who can have a baby and about heaven and hell, sometimes those are related to what happens to us on a Tuesday, and then sometimes those are different. That's why I think a theology of work is one of the most important theologies that people can have. We know what God thinks about us when we go to church and we pray and we sing, but what does he think about the 40, 50, 60 hours that we do work during the week? Is he a part of that? Does he care? What's our thought about that? I think a micro theology, like a working theology of marriage, is really helpful for people who decide to get married, because it gets hard sometimes. And so we need to understand, like, what does it mean that we said that we actually didn't say those vows to each other. We said those vows to God about each other. And like, there's a subtle theological difference there when our backs are against the wall. And so I think those micro theologies are really important. And so biblical counseling or counselors who are able to counsel from a Christian perspective, or as a friend of mine says, to meet a Christian where they are and help them be the best Christian they can be. I think is helping people identify even their micro theologies and helping them hold that up to the light of Scripture, to the light of what they really want to believe about God, or what they've seen be evidence in other areas of their life. One example is, I often hear when people are struggling, I often hear them say, man, I just need to, if I can just figure this out, then then I can start praying again. Or if I just need to get back in church and I feel like God can help me again. And, I trying to help them see, hey, there's a theology in there of that God is only interested in people who can fix everything on their own, that he's not really in that business. He's only in taking great people and making them a little bit better. But that's not necessarily the picture we get painted. In the Beatitudes, we see that God draws close to the meek, or draws close to the poor in spirit, to those who are mourning, not after they get finished mourning and they've learned 3 things that they can articulate for their small group. He meets them in their mourning. And I think, understanding that micro theology, I think, is really helpful to helping people like really embrace what God has for them and the freedom and healing that he wants them to have.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, is because like the more conviction I get as I'm continuing to pursue this master's in biblical counseling, the more I'm starting to get a vision of the people I want to work with. And it's interesting how, like, I've talked to other counselors, like, no, I really want for God to use me in all aspects. And then for me, it's just like, I feel like so convicted just to work with Christians. It's so interesting how, again, different agendas are not competing, but they're just different.
Yeah. And I think in the kingdom, God uses all those different ways. And
that's refreshing too.
Yeah. And there's something about biblical counseling. I mean, I think one of the worst things that you can do for somebody is to just write them a prescription for read this Bible verse 3 times and you'll feel better, or do this because this is what the Bible says, or this is my interpretation of the Bible. I think probably the best way, and this mirrors something about discipleship that was really impactful for me when I was in ministry and when I was a pastor and just my life as a Christian, is there's a couple of different models of discipleship. One is where we put our arm around the Bible and we point at other people and we're like, hey, do you see that? Are you looking at this? Are you listening to this? This is important. This is for you. And that's one way to do it. We can evangelize people and disciple people that way. Or there's another model, which is where we put our arm around people who are far from God and we point at the Bible and we say, oh my gosh, what if that's true? Or like, man, what if you tried that? What if I tried to live and love like that? And what if it's true what God says? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Or wouldn't that really be freeing and healing? And I just think there's a real power in that sense of curiosity. And I think good biblical counseling, at least what I have witnessed, is when in that safe, kind of vulnerable space of counseling, we kind of point at God's goodness and we say, well, what if there's more? What if he's calling us to take some new steps? Or what if there's some deeper places where you can trust him? What sort of things would happen? And then we get to be overjoyed by seeing God's goodness all over again. So
I've noticed that, like, I always ask that question just to, especially since I'm going to school for it, I'll just ask random people like, hey, what do you think biblical counseling is? Like, oh, well, they're going to tell you to do this and this and this, and they've
Right.
never been.
Right.
And so it's really interesting that that's their assumption, that they think that they're going in.
Yeah.
That they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to memorize this scripture. I'm going to have to do this, recite this 3 times, come prepared when I come in. It's just like, no, that hasn't been my experience. And the people that I've talked to who've been doing counseling for a while, it's heavy relational.
Yeah, it is. And it's just trying to integrate God's truth, God's goodness, into the places where, I mean, there's just a lot of places in our life where we just will make excuses or make assumptions that this is not something that God is interested in. You know, I see that a lot with couples that I meet, lots of couples now, this is not news to anybody, lots of couples now live together before they get married. But in the South, for Christian couples who decide to do that, unfortunately, they kind of enter into a season. It's not that God is not interested in it, doesn't care about them. They just assume that he doesn't have anything to say to them because their grandparents always told them that was living in sin. And so for years, they may not have prayed, God, help me be a good fiance or boyfriend. Help us with this conflict. Help us, find healthy people around us. They may not have opened themselves up to wisdom from, other people in their family who may have it for them because they just assume because they've made this choice. For whatever reason, people make that choice. They just assume that God has nothing to say. And so I think there are definitely reasons not to do that. I think there's definitely wisdom in evaluating that choice before you make it. But I definitely don't think that means that for whatever period God doesn't care to offer them goodness and wisdom and like healthy relational skills because he wants to see everybody flourish, especially in their core relationships.
Yeah. And I think if people become too black and white on that, then they start to become very legalistic, and they put people in camps where they don't feel like God is not with them at all.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
To put that on people like that.
So a lot of people struggle. I mean, a lot of people make that decision in Oxford because the rent is too high, like it's a logistical choice for a lot of people. But there are also byproducts of that choice too.
Yeah. How do you balance truth and grace when speaking into difficult situations? If you have an example, that'd be sweet.
Let me think. I mean, I think both of those things can be demonstrated in balance in any situation where people know that they're cared about and they're safe. And again, that is what we try to create in therapy, but it's also what I try to create in my friendships or my relationship with my kids or my relationship with my wife. It's like, hey, we can get in and wrestle about in the tension of truth and grace, in any situation, because there's always going to be like this connection, this love that's there. And so I think before I'm really tracking with people on those terms, one, I want to know if that's something that people are interested in making evaluations with in their own life. But then also long before that, we're talking about their support network and their system and who is on your team, who knows the real you, or who can begin to know the real you more. And so as they begin to wrestle with like God's challenges that may include acceptance and change, but just the safe kind, where's the healthy environment that they can do that? And using those two words, I mean, that really is in a lot of ways how I have that conversation. Just a lot of life boils down to acceptance and change. And we get ourselves in trouble when we try to change things that we just need to accept, or when we try to accept things that we really need to change. And so a lot of counseling, whether it's talking about things in terms of grace and truth, a lot of counseling comes down to that. It's like, man, it seems like this is a recurring pattern in your life. Should we be evaluating what you can change about this so that maybe you can break this pattern? Because it seems like we keep getting here, and we can make excuses, and sometimes those excuses are valid. Sometimes there are things that happen in our environment that are beyond our control, or there's power that we don't have, or autonomy we don't have. But in most situations, there is something that we can control, or there are a few things that we can control. And so it may be good for us to try to look at change along those lines and see if there's not something else that opens up.
I like that too, because just hearing you, it's like you're also giving the person who feels hopeless their power back. Like, well, there's something you can do.
Yeah.
Even if you're 1% of the problem, like let's just say logically, well, then we'll work on that 1%.
Right. That's right. And I think a lot of that kind of flows into my theology of mental health. Like that was one thing that I realized long after I got my degree and my license, I realized I do not have a working theology of mental health. I mean, the Bible does talk about depression at times. It talks some about anxiety at times, but it definitely doesn't talk about all this whole host of things that people struggle with, and the things that are now becoming more and more a part of what we talk about in our world as mental health becomes more of a topic that can be discussed openly. But I realized I didn't have a working theology of mental health, and I don't know that the church really does. And so the best understanding that I could find comes from Luke 4, when Jesus goes to the temple and he preaches his first sermon. And he gets up and he unrolls the scroll from Isaiah, and he starts saying, I've come to declare the year of the Lord's favor, to give sight to the blind, good news to the poor, to declare the year of Jubilee. And then he says, I've come to bring liberty for captives and freedom for prisoners. And then he's got a couple other things. And it's a nice little statement about who Jesus is. And for years, I thought that captives and prisoners, liberty for captives, freedom for prisoners, I thought that he was just repeating himself for dramatic effect. Like this was a communication skill. But there is a subtle difference between a captive and a prisoner that I think is important. A captive is somebody who was just living their life, plowing their field, feeding their family, doing their thing, and through no fault of their own, an invading army came in or a new political force came in and they lost their freedom. They were sold in slavery. They were held in captivity. They lost their land. Something happened and their freedom was taken away, but it wasn't their fault. A prisoner, on the other hand, is suffering consequences for something that they did. They don't have freedom, but it's because of a choice that they made that had consequences. I do believe when Jesus said that, he came to offer real freedom for both of those groups of people. I also think that he comes to offer real spiritual freedom for both of those groups of people now, because some of us are in captivity, some of us are in imprisonment, and we're imprisoned by our consequences. But the thing that I have learned in working with so many people is most of the really hard things in life are a complicated mixture of both of those things. Mm-hmm. A little bit captive, a little bit in prison, and that's why we get stuck in life. And so, think about an alcoholic. An alcoholic, one really healthy framework is that an alcoholic has a disease that, it's almost like an allergy. A couple of sips, and they're not the same person anymore. They break out in that. And so they're managing that disease, that allergy, and the things that pull them into that. And it wasn't their fault, whether it's genetics, whether it's trauma, whether it's something else that's going on in their life, it's not their fault. However, somebody who struggles with alcoholism has at times, sometimes lied. They've done some things in their relationship that's left them isolated. They've done some things maybe that cost them a job or made it hard for them to be employed. And so there's a broken trust there. There are actually consequences along the line of that. And if they don't deal with those consequences, well, then the situation could perpetuate more of that disease. And so things get kind of like a tangled mess there. And so I guess this goes back to that question too. In order to address both of them, we need the gracious healing that comes from Jesus, the gracious healing that comes from a journey towards healing, but we also need to be honest about the consequences of our actions, to make changes for things that we can control and we need to control, and to make the decisions that give us as much bandwidth as we can towards making those changes.
Yeah, this quote, right, I forget who it comes from, but it reminded me as you're going through that story, and I didn't even catch that about the captives and the prisoners. I'm glad that you differentiated those, and you wanted both of those, which is comforting at the same time, because I catch myself in both those camps. And it's hard on the issue, soft on the person.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's a first quote that popped in my head.
That's right.
Man, that's awesome. What advice would you give to someone who wants to seek help but feels ashamed or hesitant?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think that a lot of times, especially for men, a lot of my work with men, shame is the biggest thing. So it's the thing that's coming up as the wall that we have to get over to go get help. But a lot of times it's what's kind of ground us down into the place that we are. And I don't mean shame like, ooh, you guys did something dirty. Oh, you can't be clean again. But shame is where our sense of identity and our sense of inadequacy get locked in together. And it changes the way that we see ourselves, changes the way that we assume God sees us. It changes the nature of our identity. And so it usually has put them in that place of both captivity and being imprisoned to things sometimes. So usually it is shame that creates a barrier. I just feel like, and this is not a sales pitch for counseling, I just feel like counseling is a sign of health. It's not a sign of sickness or illness. It's like there's a part of me inside that's fighting, doesn't know which direction to fight. It's going to keep punching at something, so it might as well be punching the right direction. But I do think it's a sign of health in that way. And so, my first kind of spill for people who come to counseling is like mental scratch paper. It's just like when at some point about 5th grade, math got too complicated for us to work out in our head. And so we needed to work it out on paper. And when we did that, then we could see, oh, I forgot to carry the 1, or I skipped a step, and it's threw off the whole algorithm. And then also at that point, it just got so complicated. We needed to work it out that way. And sometimes life does. And so, counseling is where we do that mental scratch paper so that we can see, I did this for this reason, but that doesn't necessarily really line up with what I found out later. And so now we can connect some dots. And just like in fifth grade, if somebody knows what they're looking for, like our math teacher, they can look over our shoulder and be like, hey, you skipped a step here, or maybe you should try this part again. Or there's some other people who do this section this way, and it's a little bit easier for them, or it helps them find their workaround if they need one. And so that's kind of my role. It's I'm not going to do the problem for you, and I'm not going to take the problem and throw it away because it's going to be there, but I will help you as you're trying to sort out what's going on as you were working it out.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when people do have a negative sense of counseling, because I just never grew up that way. I always grew up in the way I was like, just counseling, just going asking people for help.
Yeah.
Like that's just meant, I don't know if subconsciously I learned that.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's really interesting. The time is spent at their job. Let's say they're an engineer and they spent all these years going to school and shadowing and these internships and on-site training for their job. But when it comes to relationships, it's all falling apart.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, have you put time in your relationship? Have you studied it? Have you sought counsel for it like you did for your career?
Yeah.
And I always thought that was fascinating. I was like, and how we put those in two separate camps.
That's right. Yeah. So maybe people's hang up with counseling with a capital C is there because we've kind of gotten away from counseling with a lowercase c, like going to people and being honest about like, hey, I don't got this. And, when I was talking about shame, that's a big part of that. It's like, and John Eldredge wrote a lot about this, about men really kind of the refrain for men a lot of times is I got this, even when we don't got this. And, we find new ways to hide. And yes, this is not just a men problem, but this is kind of everybody. Like we turn on Instagram and those people seem like they got it together. We sit in church and man, it seems like everybody else in this row has their life together. And, it's easy for us just to assume that they do and we don't. We compare our behind the scenes footage with other people's highlight reel now. That's kind of a thing that social media has done to us. And so instead of leaning into, man, I just need to be in conversations where I'm open to learning. We don't do that. And so even seeking it out professionally, I think is hard. I mean, I mentioned a minute ago, my mentor, Paul has been just such a great part of my life, but a lot of it happened because I came to a crossroads in my career and I really needed help and I needed somebody who could help me see over that. And so he's done a lot of counseling for me, just around that. And, it was really important, but I needed to come to a place where I saw the value in that just as a person.
Yeah. It's interesting and I do this in the gym too. It's some people are skeptical about signing up for the gym, but as soon as they see the value and what's going on and their life is getting better, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't know this was going to happen.
Right. Then it's just that momentum shifts. I do think some of the skepticism is there too. I mean, this is one of my rants about like modern Christianity is I think at some point we really turned in curiosity for certainty. And I think Christianity tends to now really value certainty more than curiosity. And I think we're missing something. And I just think you look at the way that Christians were involved in science and in the arts and, things throughout history. I mean, it required some bit of curiosity. The Big Bang Theory was, that was a Christian came up with that, a Jesuit mathematician or astronomer or whatever, he came up with that theory as a way of trying to understand how science and faith could be at the intersection. The works of art, the Renaissance. I mean, a lot of Christians, set those in motion and commission those works of art. And it just seems like that may have been lost over the last couple of generations. And I don't know, I think we're missing something really beautiful about God in that, but I also think we're missing something really healthy about humans, like how to be a good human and how to be a whole human because of that.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, man.
Thanks.
What do you hope people understand better about biblical counseling after here in our conversation today.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of people who are confused about it.
Yeah, I hear people come in my office a lot that are like, I'm going to tell you this, please don't judge me. Please don't judge, don't think any differently. And I have to tell them, if I was the kind of person who judged people or was looking for things to not like about other people, I would be miserable day in and day out. This is the worst possible job for that. And so just to know that people who do counseling and biblical counseling, like they're not looking to find something wrong with somebody or to think, man, my life is so much better than this person, or to treat them the way that maybe other family members have treated them, or people in their church have treated them, or people, in school treated them. Like, we're looking for the actual healthy things in there, the things that have the fingerprints of God on them in there. And we're trying to figure out how they can, experience what Paul talks about the new creation. They're trying to figure out how to experience that, not just a big T theology, but as something that could happen to them on a Thursday, on a Friday. And so the biggest joy, the biggest, the thing that I love most about my job is that I'm usually one of the first ones to see the sun coming up in somebody's life. Usually they're the ones to see it first. It kind of lights their face up first. But I mean, just a conversation I had last week about, I had 3 good days in a row, and I can't tell you how long it's been since I had that. I mean, that's the sun coming up on somebody, or a couple. I got a text earlier today. It's like, man, the last 2 weeks have been the best 2 weeks we've had in years, and we've finally figured some things out, and it's so good because now, just like you said about the gym, now we don't see ourselves as a fighting couple. Now we see ourselves as a potentially healthy couple. And so many other things are starting to kind of fall into place. And that's what it looks like when the sun comes up.
Yeah, no, it's really cool when you see the hard work that you feel like God's called you to do, and you're starting to see the fruits of it. And then you see it passed down to their kids, and then you see the whole family. And I remember seeing one client who was just super overweight, and then they lost over 100 pounds, and now they're chasing after their grandbabies. And it's like,
That's
it's
awesome.
so cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. Amazing.
Let's talk about a little bit more about you.
Okay. What do you want to know about me?
Everything. So talk about your journey, because you were a pastor before this, and then you feel like God's called you to counseling. So talk about like what inspired you to become a pastor.
Sure.
When did you get saved? Like, give us a good summary of to this point.
Sure. So, my story, my story as a Christian was pretty boring. In fact, when I worked at Camp Lake Stevens, me and another buddy of mine, counselors, we would just like try to make up more exciting testimonies because it was pretty boring. I grew up in the church. My parents were divorced, so I was really into church. It was kind of like that was such an anchor for me, and I was really blessed by that, especially my youth group. And part of that time was that, I had different people in my life pouring into me, and my parents were always encouraging of that and of all the other things. And there was always a part of me that thought I was going to be in ministry one day, and so I got involved in a church called the Orchard in Tupelo. And when the Orchard opened, it was in like an elementary school gym, and they needed an acoustic guitar player, and I could play acoustic guitar. And so I would stand on the back of the stage and play. And the Orchard was kind of one of these churches that just once it started, it just kind of took off, and just grew and grew and grew and grew. It's still a wonderful community of faith there in Tupelo, and does some amazing things, and still have lots of friends there. I got to really see leadership done really well at a high level from another mentor of mine, Brian Collier, and other people on staff there, and was just really thankful for that. And so through that time, I kind of made my connections there when I got out of college, which I had gone for a psychology degree. And I really don't even remember making that decision, but it worked out well about 20 years later. But I made that decision and got out of school and then started working there. And about a year after I started working there, they were looking at a community like Oxford, and like, man, it's really growing. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of need there. There aren't a lot of contemporary churches. I mean, this is in the early 2000s before there were a lot of churches like that in Oxford. And so they even looked at their contacts, and there were like 100 people on there with the Oxford addresses. And like, hey, this is a good place to go plant a church. And so they asked, and even, I mean, I kind of just fell backwards into it. They were like, do you want to go plant this church? And so I didn't know any better. I had just gotten married. Me and Sarah had only been married for about 3 months when we got offered this opportunity. And so we said, yeah. And we came and we started church here. And we started meeting at the Powerhouse and the Arts Council. And so, we love our friends down there, but it was wild. We would be cleaning up for church on Sunday morning after the Kappa Sig crawfish bowl in there on Saturday night, and it was just such a mess. It was wild, and it was kind of funny because we realized we didn't open the spreadsheet to see all those 100 addresses of people who lived in Oxford, and when we finally opened it after we had moved over here and rented a space, we opened it and we realized like most of them were college students who were now living somewhere else. My friend Lyle, he had 5 addresses on there because he had moved around to Oxford so much. We had a bunch of people at 117 Camp Lake Stevens Drive. So we basically started from scratch. But, at every season, God just provided for us and brought wonderful people who were part of that journey and opened up doors. And it was wonderful. And Sarah and we did that. I led that church for 13 years, and it was great. I got into pastoring before I finished my seminary degree, though. And it was always the plan to kind of finish that as I went, but we had babies, the church would grow, people were upset with me, whatever it was. I always had an excuse not to go back and take another class. And so I knocked out a few, but about 2015, I just realized I need to get another degree. I need to get a master's degree. It's just the best thing for my family. And during that season, I realized, the things that I loved about my job were the times when I would be able to sit with people and do counseling with them. And then I would refer them out, and I would it was that curiosity thing. I would be just so curious, like, how does somebody untangle this knot, or how do people get over this? And so that curiosity was getting to me. I love preaching and teaching. I feel like I'm being a little preachy here on the podcast today. I feel like I love preaching and teaching, the creative pursuits of that. But I just, I was really fascinated by that and just did not like the administrative part of running a church. And so just through a season of about 9 months of prayer and fasting, it's when I just began to take steps towards going back and getting my master's degree in clinical mental health. And so that's what I did. I did it. I went back online. And so I would do that while I was working. I would do grad school at 4:00 in the morning. And it was for 2 years, just, oh my gosh, it was tough. But went back and found a good program to do, and then was able to make a great transition. And the church hired Eric George, who's a buddy of mine, who's doing a fantastic job. Lets me still come back and sit on the back row and have a good seat back there. And the church is just full of so many people I love and care about. And so I've really been blessed in that way. But then as I made a transition into counseling, just counseling is delivered on all its promises for me. It's just kind of, I just love it. I get excited. I try to see as many different kinds of situations, different kinds of people. I love a day that's full. Like today, I work with a college student who's going through some anxiety stuff. I work with an older couple who's trying to figure out how to have a better relationship with their grandkids. I'm working, just all across the board, families and stuff like that. I just really enjoy that. And so, that's just fine. It's been a real blessing.
So what year is this on counseling now then?
So this is year, I think I started my practicum in 2017. So this is year 8.
Year 8.
But I was a counselor through the pandemic. So I feel like that means that this is year 15. That's right. We all aged a whole lot. Those were some tough, that was tough. Because I had just made this transition and then the world shut down. And it was like, I just got into a career where all I need are 2 chairs and a room to be in, but I don't know that people want to be in a room with me right now. And so we refitted everything to go online. And for 18 months, I worked out of my closet office and would see people online and really just kind of watched that crazy period of world history just unfold in the lives of people. And so it was a wild trip, but I'm glad it's over. But I was telling somebody the other day, every time I think about one of my clients during that, who I was working with during the pandemic, they had like this special place in my heart because we really went through it. We were all trying to figure out what was going on. I saw business leaders trying to figure out how, they would figure out how to get their business refitted, and then something would change again. They were trying to figure, I'm sure, I don't know if you were in the gym business then, but you probably saw that. You remember that. I mean, you see people kind of get drawn back into the chaos of it. And, sat with people who lost people, couldn't be in the hospital with people while they were dying. And, and then they would turn on the news and hear all these crazy things being said, or they had family members that were saying things. I mean, it was just such a hard time for people. So yeah, I count those years as like 3 years.
Gotta be. I would say that. Yeah, that was tough. We actually expanded during COVID when we shut down. We're like, all right, this is our time to expand.
Yeah, good.
So we just took a leap of faith.
Knocked the wall out and stuff like that. Yeah.
Knocked the wall out, and then we just ran with it. So it was actually
good for you.
People were struggling. We were just like, how long we got? No, not knowing if
that
we're
was smart. Yeah.
Not knowing if we're going to return anyway, but we're just like, might as well go with it.
That's right.
Now, you've been married. How has that changed now since you've been a counselor? Because I think what's fascinating, and this just from other people who's been a counselor, they've said it's since you hear all their stories of these people, you see these great stories, you also see these heartbreaks. It almost makes you think like, one, you're not the only one struggling because you always see these stories. And then two, it's just like, man, I actually have a really good spouse.
Yeah. I do think it's a head game. I think there are times I have to be careful. Just internally, there are times when if there's, just in seasons where I'm not quite as connected to my wife, that's when some of the things that I hear people say in counseling will kind of fill in the gaps there. I hear people say, and, at times when they're really struggling, well, I just don't want to be around him. I'm not attracted to him. Or I'm not, I think I don't have any respect for her, or whatever it is. Like it's easy for those things to kind of come in and fill in the gaps, even just in times when life is just busy and full and we get disconnected like everybody does. And so I have to kind of mind myself there. I also have to realize no marriage is healthy without intention, including mine. And so I have to constantly think about that. We have to constantly try to figure out how are we going to create touch points, or we'll just be like anybody else that struggles. And so, that looks different in every season. So, I think the key to marriage is, trying to figure out how in every season to build areas of intimacy and to find that connection. And so for a long time, I don't think this is necessarily our primary point of connection. For a long time, the part of our day when we would connect and really hear from each other was when we were folding clothes at night before bed. And it was good because the clothes got folded. But it was also kind of the perfect arrangement because when you're folding clothes, you can't look at your phone. So we weren't really disconnected. We weren't really distracted. We could actually talk and hear from each other. And also in our house, when you're folding clothes, the kids disappear. They don't want to have anything to do with that. And so it was like a kind of a natural meeting point for us. Now that the weather's not out to kill us, it's kind of, when on nights that are not super hot or super busy, just to go for a walk. I think most couples benefit from talking about anything, whether it's just life or whether it's decisions they have to make. I think everybody benefits from walking while they talk about it, because then we're kind of embodying being side by side, facing something together instead of just squaring off against each other. And so that's just been a really good time for us. We're celebrating 20 years this December. And so we're excited about that. We've been spending a lot of time thinking and talking about all the ways that we've changed and all the different things that God's allowed us to do together in those 20 years. And so that's been fun. We took a little trip this summer to celebrate that, and we really needed that. Another thing is we have fought hard to build things that we are passionate about, and our kids and just all the amazing things we see God doing through their life is one of those things. But Sarah and I 10 years ago started a support group for foster families, and this was something she started, and I've gladly been helping her with that. But she has just such a wonderful ministry to all sorts of foster families in our area, and because of that. And so that's been something that we've done together to create a sense of intimacy. We've gotten involved the last couple of years with this great organization called Blue Skies, which does, they put on camps for families that have been impacted by childhood cancer. And so our family of 5 goes and we serve together a couple of times during the year, and we get to know families. We get to walk with them and stay in touch with them. And so, we have some friends that are at St. Jude right now, and they're there for treatment, but they have a young child with them, a 2-year-old, in a children's hospital, running around, not always the easiest thing. So she comes and stays with us some, and that's something that we get to do together. And so we're constantly trying to look for different ways. Like you said, like it's one thing to have to remind yourselves, hey, we're on the same team. It's another thing to continue to take on things that force you to be on the same team, because then we don't have to tell ourselves that. We don't have to remind ourselves that. It's like we naturally fall into that. And I think that's been something that has been really powerful that we've learned.
Yeah. So what are the current touch points you guys are doing now to stay connected and just continue to have the romantic spark to keep that fire burning, as some of my mentors would say?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's trying to spend time together. I mean, I just think intimacy and romance, I think it begins with trying to, just trying to be the fixed touch point, the fixed place of connection in the world where like life is kind of swirling all the time, just in that busyness. And so that's always kind of come naturally to us. I mean, I think there's, just like in my career, I think there's just been some things in life that I've just fallen into naturally that have been God's blessing for me. And so Sarah and I haven't really had to work on that. We've always just kind of naturally kind of landed there. And so we've had to many times, remind ourselves like, hey, if we can talk about things, we can work things out. And so we have to like continue to strive to find the ways to communicate about different things. But once we do that, we can kind of lock in on things.
Kind of goes back to what you said, like it's one thing about reminding yourself you're a team, but if you're doing things that you are a team, there's no reminder. You guys are always doing touch points naturally.
Yeah, it just happens. And so, just being curious about each other's day. I mean, I had to really realize once in 2018, once I switched to counseling, there was something that I did not foresee coming, is that I work all day long and have many adventures in counseling, but I can't talk about any of it when I go home. I mean, that's private information. And so I had to become a better curator of honestly being interesting. Like I had to think, I need to be thinking about things that we can talk about, or we need to be creating things just so that we continue to have this shared life together. And so I try to read interesting things or think about interesting things or try new things. And, whenever I think of something, I take it, I'm like, oh, this will be good. We can talk about this tonight, which is a weird move. Not really something I thought I would be getting myself into 20 years ago when I got married, but that is one of the parts. I mean, when I do premarital counseling for people, I tell them, you're making a promise on your wedding day. You're actually making 1 million promises, and you won't even begin to foresee all the different ways that you'll say, I love you, or show I love you over the course of your marriage. And that's one of the ways that I never saw coming, but I think curating that has been something that I really kind of had to recognize and realize too.
Yeah. And I guess now, since you definitely work through couples, is there a good baseline to touch points, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, sexually? Like what is that? Is there like some homework assignments? I know some people need a little bit more touch points depending on their personalities. Yeah. Like how would you kind of give a baseline? Like, hey, this probably needs at least this touch point where you guys can at least be intimate with each other.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great question. And so I think just in a practical sense, I realized that a lot of couples don't have that touch point. And so even at any given point in the week, without a plan for the week, like the week just eats you up, especially if you've got young kids and, you're in that stage of life where you're just running and gunning. The week kind of runs you, whether you run, except for, and the week runs you, it's not you run the week. And so I created this PDF that I give a lot of couples called the Sunday Rundown. And it's designed to have a 15 or 20 minute on a Sunday night just to go through the calendar. There's actually a little calendar printed on the bottom. Just go through, okay, what nights of the week do we have stuff? What nights of the week are we going to be home? And we need to tell people we're busy that night because we need home time. What are we doing next weekend and how can we prepare for that? What are the things we have to do that we don't want to do, like mow the grass and go to the grocery store? I mean, how are we going to manage those this week? And when are we going to get connecting time? What night of the week are we going to try to leave a little gas in the tank and stay up later than the kids and try to connect? Or if we, for couples that are, don't have kids, like what night of the week are you not going to play Call of Duty with your friends so that we can, hang out, spend some time, just enjoy each other. And so carving out that time is helpful. Another part of that rundown is just a couple of questions about finances, because a lot of couples don't talk about money unless something's wrong. And so trying to figure out how to have that conversation. What are the big expenses this week? How are we doing on our budget? Are there any changes that we need to make in the way that we're spending? Just conversations like that that can be neutral and not aggressive or full of conflict. And then there's like 4 question prompts on there to that just to have a real conversation, not one about who's going to pick the kids up or some argument we've had before, but what are your goals for this week? How can I help you this week? What do you feel like God is saying to you this week? Things like that, just so that we can have, even if it's quick, just to have a conversation that's a little bit deeper, I think is important. So practically speaking, that's one touch point, but I'm hoping it creates others. It creates a little bit of margin for people throughout the week.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. It's interesting because if you can get those touch points, naturally you're going to be more intimate.
That's right.
And when intimacy is driving, then 9 times 10, you're probably going to have sex.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I do a lot of, because I do couples counseling, I talk a lot about sex. And I think that is a source of I'm not telling you anything groundbreaking. That's a source of conflict for a lot of couples.
Yeah, and there's questions about it. So yeah.
Yeah, and so there's people's sex drives fluctuate over the course of their life, and that fluctuation creates challenges. People also have different love languages, and the 5 love languages is old school, but it still stands the test of time. And so some people who have the love language of physical touch just expect for their love language to be spoken without them having to learn and speak somebody else's love language. Like sometimes you have to learn a second language to be able to speak. And so just kind of understanding that. And then also understanding that sex kind of exists at the crossroads of a lot of parts of ourselves, the way that we see our identity, the way we see our bodies, the way that we see the amount of time and energy that we have, the amount of connection that we have. And so because of that, sometimes it's lost logistically in a busy life. And so figuring out how to prioritize time for that. And that's usually, that's like sex therapy 101 is most couples get to a certain point in their lives when they need to schedule time for intimacy. And I always laugh because that principle or that advice is usually not received very well. People are like, oh, that doesn't sound very spontaneous. That doesn't sound very romantic to me. But it's kind of like convincing somebody to buy a minivan. Nobody really likes that idea on the surface. But once you buy that minivan and you're sitting here like, golly, there's a lot of room in here. This is kind of convenient. This is nice. And so people can usually warm up to that idea later on. And I'm kind of adding to that. The more couples I work with, the more I realize like setting aside time, a night for sex or intimacy is probably still creates some anxiety or some weird pressure that doesn't necessarily open people up to that. It usually doesn't work. So I just encourage people to try to set aside a night or two to just connect. Sometimes it may be, hey, we're just going to sit close together on the couch. We're going to try to stay awake without getting on our phones. We're going to look through our wedding album. We're going to watch something on TV that we're both interested in that we kind of save and create a little bit of momentum around, just something that to go from, 0 to 100 is a big jump. But if we can already be kind of halfway there, either that tends to turn into sex more, but even if it doesn't, it feels like connection. And the person who has a higher sex drive in any season feels loved and seen and connected, and that usually meets their need. And so a lot of times that's helpful if we can just, but we got to create margin in our life to create time to slow down and be connected with each other.
And it's interesting that you said that too, about sometimes people who have higher sex drives realize that they really just needed to be more connected with intimacy before even having sex.
Sure.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah,
and it's so true.
That's the only way. A lot of times that's the only way that they can gauge it, or they've kind of been conditioned to, like, we either are having sex or we're not, and that's how we know that we're connected. When really that's a very complicated need that they're trying to meet there, and there are other ways of meeting that need. And it's interesting how people forget that sometimes.
Yeah, because as one of my mentors said, you can have sex with your spouse and still feel not connected with them.
Still feel really lonely. Sure.
So yeah, that's really practical too, that you can take and do. Going through, so how many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids.
You have 3 kids.
Yep.
Are older, younger? Like, where are they at?
Yeah. So I have one that's a teenager. Well, two that are teenagers, and one who's 11. So 2 girls and a boy, and just trying to figure it out through every season of life. But that's just another area when I just feel really blessed. I just see God on display in them in so many different ways. So.
Now, has that changed? Has your parenting style has changed now since you've been a counselor? And if it has, like, what does that look like now? Or has that drove a little bit more patience? Or
I'm sure it has. I mean, I work with a lot of young people who are 13, 16, and work with a lot of families. So people who are the same age as my kids. And so I do think that helps. I've been able to kind of hear things from the other side. And that helps. I think, and I don't know where I picked this up, but there's a couple of things that I think about all the time as a parent. One of them is, and the key to being a parent is to find what you really enjoy in every stage. And this goes back to it, like almost in Ecclesiastes, like, to everything there's a season. I think God does his best work when we lean into what season we're in. And we're not trying to get what's like, hurry up, give me the next season. Or we're not trying to just hold on to the last season, but trying to figure out what's the season that we're in. And so, I think parenting, so much joy, and it can be found there, and so much, you can save yourself a lot of grief by trying to find that. And so I really work hard to do that, and feel like I've been able to find that, and I just really enjoyed my time with my kids. So I think that's one thing. If in the absence of that, I mean, in every season we can find something to be annoyed by and aggravated with, and if we aren't careful, we can find just negativity, and that becomes a habit at home. A lot of times it's just coming in. Oh, I'm mad because the stuff isn't picked up again, or I'm mad. Why didn't you do this? And we just make a lot of assumptions, I think, about our kids, and so it just trying to get beyond that. One of my mantras, one of the things that I try really intentionally, I got from this book called The 4 Agreements, which is a psychology book. It's kind of it's a philosophy book. It's a little strange book, but it's about take absolutely nothing personally. And so I've been trying to do that. What other people do or say towards us is more a reflection of what's going on in them, and not necessarily indicative of me. And so I can, to take something personally is a choice that we get to make. And we forget that in the South. We think it's like one of our pastimes in the South, but it is something that we can choose or not choose. And so I think that's really informed my parenting too. I could really, oh, this is disrespect. You're being disrespectful, when really they're just being hungry or sleepy or anxious, or they just made a mistake, and I don't have to assault to that. Yeah, just being a kid. And so I think that's been helpful. I also think teenagers going into teenage years, there's just like what I call swampy head syndrome. And I'm not necessarily talking about my kids, but I'm talking about some of the kids I worked with. Is like when your brain is still forming in those years, you can go from being on rational, realistic, solid ground to being underwater, like adrift in your emotions and irrational thoughts in just moments. I mean, you can make that transition really fast, and even kids don't see that coming. And so, we try to figure out how to walk with them when they're walking on solid ground, or when they're underwater, and just loving them where they are and realizing that's part of becoming an awesome adult is going through things like that.
Yeah. No, I like that too. And like you said, it is a strong learned behavior when you're just negative.
Yeah.
I call it the Eeyore mentality.
That's right.
I'm like, okay, you don't want to be Tigger where you're hyper all the time. It's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But you just kind of want to be that Winnie the Pooh if you
Right.
want to feel it.
Right. And so for a lot of parents, I think coming in to the transition from work to home, or the transition from even for people who stay home with their kids, from running and gunning to like being present, that transition is so helpful, and figuring out some way to make that well, whether it's if you are out working all day and you're coming home, like putting your phone down. Don't make the last couple of work phone calls on your way home, just so that you can have a few minutes to be calm and kind of clear your mind before you walk into a house where people want to engage with you. And just kind of getting away from some of those assumptions and narratives that create that negativity, I think, is really important.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Now, looking back at your life, what has been the most challenging thing that you've went through? Mm-hmm. And then through that, how has that shaped you to be a better counselor?
Let's see. I mean, I just, the most challenging things that I've been through are things where I have suffered. I mean, I just don't trust anybody who hasn't suffered, and I don't trust really a lot of things that I've grown in my life unless they've come out of some of the hard things that I've been through. And so, I lost my dad really suddenly when I was 23. It was about 3 months before we got married, and then moved, and then came here. So my dad, who I loved very close to, never saw me become a husband, father, pastor, counselor, really a man. And so, that was the gift that kept on giving. That was the wound that I kept having to try to figure out how to heal and work around in every season of my life, and still am. I mean, I still, we went to my son's football game last night, had an awesome play, caused a fumble. We were like very excited, good defensive move. And I just wish he had been there to see that. So I'm constantly like facing that grief and incorporating that grief, hopefully in healthy ways in my life. And so, that was the thing that really rocked me. I mean, I went to counseling for the first time after that, and that was transformative in my life. And I think about that experience and try to use that to be empathetic to the people who are coming to counseling for the first time in their lives, and try to connect with them in that way. And so that was hard. I remember didn't want to go back to work. I remember she got really stuck, and my boss and mentor, Brian Collier, finally, he just had to call me and be like, "Hey, you got to come back to work. Like, I love you, but this will be good for you." And I didn't like it when he said that, but he was exactly right. And I needed to, this was like 3 weeks later. And so I needed to kind of start moving in a direction and moving forward. And that was really helpful for me. And so, I just learned a lot about suffering and about grief and about loss then. And I think it would be really hard for me to know how to track with people who are going through something like that if I hadn't experienced it myself.
Now, how would you describe you and your dad's relationship? Because it seems like you guys were pretty close.
Yeah.
And because some people haven't had that experience.
Yeah, it's super close. We had lunch together the day before he died, and it was great. And so, just really encouraging. I think we were a lot alike. We are a lot alike. Kind of look alike. The older I get, the more I look like him. But yeah, it was really a special thing. And so, when the thing that I tell people a lot about grief and loss is like, to lose somebody that you're close to is actually a serial killing, because he wasn't just my dad. He was like a cheerleader. He was a source of financial stability and security. He was kind of like, we just had a lot of fun together. Like we would laugh and enjoy each other a whole lot. He was a person that, he was an accountant, so he helped me with my taxes. Just things like that. You don't realize all the different roles that somebody takes on in your life until they're gone. And so, to really grieve and to really like move through that in a healthy way is to slow down and take stock of all those different things, and then when applicable, figure out other ways to fulfill those needs in your life in healthy ways. And so I had to find a new accountant, but I also got to see God bring so many just wonderful men into my life through my life in ministry and through just life. Like I began to see God do that in so many different ways, and just leaning into those relationships. Not like I was trying to replace him, but there was a part of that. I needed somebody to mentor me. I needed somebody who was encouraging and fun. I needed to be seeking out friendships that were healthy. And so I saw God begin to, I love that verse about I'll restore everything the locust ate. And I began to see God doing that, and just being open to that really made it all the difference in me as a man. So yeah.
Yeah. And, I think Freud came up with this, but it's just a theory, obviously, but it's called complicated grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Complex grief.
But it's pretty, it's that stuff is, when the first time I heard it, I was just like,
yeah.
Oh, no wonder why when this person passed away, they played such different roles in my life. That's why I'm hurting so much much worse.
That's right.
Compared to somebody I barely even knew.
That's right. And so there's unfinished business, which was another thing, part of that, things you wish you had said that didn't say, which is all the more reason for us to say the things now while people are alive, or tell people how much they mean to us. But that's kind of complex. Our parts of our identity are wrapped up in the people closest to us. And when they die, it's very difficult. Parts of our security, and, it's just like a part of us. And so, I don't know that there's uncomplex grief, really. I mean, I lost my grandfather, who was this great man, several years ago, and my grandmother lived by herself for a while, and her heart was broken. So she was her sweet self for a long time, but just really lonely. One day she got up, sat down on the couch, opened her Bible to read it, and put her head down and died.
Wow.
And I guess if there's any death or loss in my life that was uncomplicated, it was that one, because it just felt like, thank you, Jesus. What a sweet thing. What a sweet gift you gave her. And so that one was uncomplex, but any other loss I've ever been through, there's some common complications, whether it's, even if it's not like something that we have between a person, but a loss a lot of times challenges those micro theologies. It challenges the ways that things that we believe about God, and we don't always recognize it. But yeah, it impacts us in that way too.
Yeah. And that just had me thinking, the more roles a person plays in your life, the harder it is when they do pass.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you aren't careful, you'll begin to fill those spaces with things that are unhealthy. Instead of having the confidence to face problems, you'll fill those roles with, just ways to avoid your problems or ways to make excuses. And that's not good. That's a good way to get even more stuck.
Now, I've noticed some parents, what they'll do, and including mine, and me and my parents have talked about this, is some of the things that they suffered through, the challenges they went through, they just, hey, I don't want to tell them. It's not that I don't not feel comfortable talking about it. I just don't want them to ever feel that type of pain.
Yeah.
And then there's parents on the other side who probably overshare and probably age appropriate. It's probably not healthy for them to hear at that time.
Yeah.
How do you balance that out as, some of the stuff that you've been through and then some of the people you get the opportunity to work with, or do you have some examples that are good to do?
Yeah, no, I think disclosure around that, the closer and more connected you are to your kids, the more that you know what's appropriate to disclose. And, those conversations can be evolving. We can have conversation about, hey, it's obvious your grandfather's not here, but later on, then we fill in the gaps. What happened pretty suddenly. And, I really had a hard time, and I needed some time. I needed some help to bounce back from that. I mean, that's not something I would have told them at 6 or 7, but that's something they've heard me talk really honestly about, because the one thing that's guaranteed in life is that they're going to suffer.
Yep.
I would love it. I'd love that not to be the case. I'd give anything for them not to have any suffering, but that's not an offer that's made available to me. And so, I want them to suffer well. And I think I don't know. I think that's one of the things in our world now is that we just equate suffering with bad immediately. I'm going to run from it. I want to hide from it. I don't want to talk about it, because to suffer means that I have to admit that I'm weak or that I somehow don't have the right answers. But I think there's too much that grows in that. And so, I mean, that's why it bleeds into my work too. Like a lot of people think I see people at their worst, but actually I see people at their best, because when you're suffering, it's when you're like pushing down into a deeper layer. I mean, you're finding something new that you didn't know you had in there. And a lot of times, because God is like shining a light for you and offering that to you and meeting you in those places. But I mean, I think so much that people need, and so much of what people offer to their core relationships, they only find when they suffer. And so, yeah, I think I'm trying as a parent, and trying even as, as somebody who's helping other families, just to try to talk about suffering in a different light, so that it brings freedom and not.
Yeah. And it's challenging trying to navigate like what to share and what to not at times. It's not always easy. And I always tell people, well, then just seek help and ask counsel, see what it is.
Right.
Don't think you have to make the decision on your own.
Right. That's good. I mean, trauma happens with kids when they go through something they don't have any tools for. And so, there's enough opportunity for that in kids' lives. And so we want to offer them that kind of honesty, or offer them a part of our own struggle when we know they're kind of ready to hold it.
Yeah. And I think just for the people that have discipled me and poured into me, once I became trustworthy and they seen the fruit, they seen the growth, and like you said, we got more connected, then they would share some of these stories that I never thought they would ever go through, or that they even ever been through. And those stories have made me not only feel more closer to them, but more human.
Right.
And I just can't. And obviously there's a time and place, like you said, in the orbit as you get closer and they get in that golden stage. But it's just like, once I got into that stage of a safe person, even though they're mentoring me, like some people you're mentoring are not safe yet. That's the point of mentorship sometimes.
Right.
And you're hopefully going to build that connection. But that's one of the things that really comforted my heart as a person who got saved at 24. And then they're sharing all these things they've been through. I'm just like, why are you so happy?
Right.
And so that helped me like almost see the light of God. I'm like, wow, this is remarkable.
Yeah. And if you walk with people enough, you realize there's a lot of truth in that axiom that says never overestimate what God can do in a day, or underestimate what God can do in a year or 10 years or 20 years. And to see just the way that people can triumph and move past things when you really learn about what people have been through. I mean, there's a lot of times in our life where we're like, oh my goodness, if this happened to me, I would freak out. I would never recover. If I had this happen, if I lost somebody, or if my business went under, or if I made this decision, it didn't work out, like I would never recover. But you realize the more stories that you hear, the more that God, he does, he brings us back. He works through things. He heals us. He restores us. I mean, he's good to us. So there's a lot of confidence that comes from that.
Yes. Ooh, this is a good one. Here's another question. This is by Kiri, actually, Ben's wife. How beneficial is biblical counseling compared to other types of counseling?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think even for Christians, I think there are times when I'm trying to employ different types of counseling, and so I think good, solid biblical counseling is going to be one that also tracks on other things that have been followed, that have been really studied and researched. So, for example, CBT therapy is kind of one of the biggest therapies that we have for anxiety, depression, bipolar, and it's about. I mean, I think a lot of people have a faulty assumption that all I do is talk about people's feelings all day. But really, I'm talking about people's thoughts more than that, and the actions that come from those thoughts. Because it's really hard to change your feeling state. But if we change the way that we think and the way that we behave, we have a little bit more control over the way that we feel. And so CBT helps us evaluate our thoughts, and it helps us try to figure out how, if there are certain thought patterns that aren't working for us, how to change it out. Kind of like we would a part in our car's engine that's gone faulty. If I replace it with something that fires better, or a belt that isn't loose, then the whole engine's going to run better. And a lot of people don't know that about thoughts. But somebody who did know that was Paul in the Bible, because he talked about that a long time ago. And he talked about how in Romans 12, how we can improve our life by renewing our mind. He talked about how we can take every thought captive, take it back to the love of God and the truth of Scripture. And so, good biblical counseling, I think, builds on those models. And I think good CBT also acknowledges, like, hey, that we didn't create something new here. We are actually helping people function the way that God called them to function. So I think that's true. I think there's some things in other modalities for counseling that really integrate well to the way that we're called to love and to serve other people. And so, I think good counseling lays into that. And then good biblical counseling, again, it's not just, hey, here's a couple of prescriptions, take it and run with it. Here's a couple of Bible verses to read, and this will make you feel better. But good biblical counseling helps people build layer by layer towards a healthier place.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Pat, that flew by. That's our time.
It was quick.
It was
good questions.
Some of the questions we didn't even get to. I feel like me can go for another couple hours, but I know you have clients coming. But thank you so much for coming on. I know you're busy, especially the season you're with kids and teenager stage, and the wisdom and the insight that you shared. And it is remarkable to work with Ben, and Ben's very open, like who he works with. And so you've made a major role in his life, and his testimony is incredible. And he shares insight that helps me and here with myself, and me and him talk and communicate, and just many of the other clients that we get the opportunity to work with that have either touched base with you at one point or heard your sermons. It is remarkable to be around and just seeing the fruits over just spreading everywhere. And so I really appreciate your work.
Kind. And appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
We'll do it again sometime.
All right, let me pray for you, and then we'll head out. Dear Father, thank you for the opportunity for me and Pat to sit down in this podcast. I just pray for his ministry and the work that he's doing, and just pray over his family and his kids and protection over that. And also, Lord, just for all of our listeners here, the people that who've just seen the insight and the wisdom, put it in practice. And then also for our listeners who don't know the gospel, Lord, I pray that you draw them near. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.